on embedding sustainability into teaching practices. My name is John Beal. I'm the Managing Director for SDSN Canada, based at the University of Waterloo. And we're a national network that works to engage Canada's universities and colleges to take action on the Sustainable Development Goals. So we're really thrilled to be co-hosting today's conversation on embedding sustainability into teaching. And having this be part of this national week-long campaign that we're also co-hosts for, called SDG Week Canada. And this is really it's a nice partnership between the Sustainability Hub at UBC, SDSN Canada, and Colleges and Institutes Canada, as a way to really spotlight the great action happening on our campuses for the SDGs. And so trying to rally the post-secondary community across the country for this week to showcase SDG progress, but really actually to try and drive more action and more integration of the SDGs. So lots of events happening throughout Canada this week. Take a look if you want. We'll post a link to SDG Week Canada, the website. You can see lots of different events in the chat. So as I welcome you today, I'd like to acknowledge the history of the lands on which we gather. So I'd love to invite everyone to reflect on the place from which you're joining today and your relationship with that land in the chat. For us, SDSN Canada, we're situated at the University of Waterloo, which is on the traditional territory of the Attawandaron, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. The main campus is situated on the Haldimand Tract, which is land granted to the Six Nations that includes 6 miles on each side of the Grand River. And the university's active work towards reconciliation takes place across all of its campuses through research, learning, teaching, and community building, and is centralized and coordinated within the Office of Indigenous Relations. And it's important to remember, acknowledging the land like this reminds us that Canada's achievements are directly related to the resources and friendship of Indigenous peoples, and that we must all push for transformative acts over the coming decade towards reconciliation and justice. So with that, I just welcome to the session. I'd like to pass the mic over to our moderator for today, program coordinator at SDSN Canada, Morenike Ojurongbe. So Morenike, over to you and to introduce this great panel that we've gathered.
Thank you so much, John, and welcome everyone to today's session. A quick run through of the agenda today. We'll be speaking with our panelists for 40 minutes and they'll open up the floor for Q&A session. Please, as the conversation is going on, please put your questions in the Q&A chat box. Please, and as John has said, please introduce yourself in the chat box where you're calling us and where you're joining us from today. So a quick run through, we'll be discussing embedding sustainability into teaching practice. And I came across a very interesting survey by Times Higher Ed that talks about how prospective international students, and I can expand that to students more generally, kind of choose a university or college based on their commitment to sustainability than for its location. And I think that's quite interesting to point out that there's an increasing interest in incorporating and integrating sustainability across all post-secondary functions. And that includes research, operations, and learning and teaching. So in today's session, we're going to be exploring these strategies to employ towards integrating sustainability into teaching and learning to help improve students' learning outcomes. So with that said, we have an interesting lineup of speakers today. And as this week we have the International Women's Day, we're celebrating by having an all-women's panel. So yay to us women. And I'm pleased to welcome Aditi Garg. She's the Educational Development Specialist at University of Saskatchewan. We have Kshamta Hunter. She's the Manager of Transformative Learning and Student Engagement with the UBC Sustainability Hub, and also an instructor at the Faculty of Education at the University of British Columbia. We have Jennifer Williams, who is the founder of Teach SDGs and the co-founder of a nonprofit called Take Action Globally. And last, definitely not the least, we have Caroline Still. She's Assistant Professor, Department of Humanities, York University. So a big welcome to all our panelists today. Thank you so much for joining us. So I'm excited to hear your thoughts on today's topic. And we know that colleges and universities play a vital role in preparing students to meet the sustainability challenges of the future. And what better way to do that than integrating or embedding the sustainability into learning and teaching? And I'm going to start off with you, Kshamta. I know that your interest lies in the intersection of sustainability, learning, and leadership through student engagement. Is that one of the components of embedded sustainability? What do you think? Can you take us through what that actually means? Kshamta?
Absolutely. Thanks, Morenike. Thank you for that introduction. I'm joining you today from the University of British Columbia, which is located in so-called Vancouver, Canada, on traditional, ancestral, and unceded territory of the Musqueam people. Thank you for that question. I think for me, embedding sustainability, what really starts with is rethinking beyond the traditional ways of teaching and learning and sort of stepping outside the bonds of the traditional education system. I think SDGs are based in the notion of understanding that collective and societal benefits ultimately benefits individuals. So moving from this more individualized to a collective and community-based teaching practices where values are centered should be the basis of all education from my perspective. So integrating values-based education, but also integrating pedagogies that center kindness and trauma-informed approaches that are necessary for the 21st century teaching and learning. Youth, we know, are facing the realities and the emotional impacts of the climate, the political and the social crisis that we face. And educators really need to be able to respond to that need and support students through those learning processes. But it's also about challenging the traditional notions and understanding of status quo and structural barriers that exist. And it's about understanding that most of the crises that we face today are inherently and fundamentally justice issues and are based in the inequities that are benefiting the few. So justice-based education is absolutely necessary to resolve today's challenges and move forward with a collective impact from my perspective.
Thank you so much for that, Kshamta. And I would love to hear more about the justice-based education because we're in a room full of with educators. But I just wanted to move on with to Aditi. Do you have any thoughts as to what embedding the sustainability means and what it involves?
Thank you, Morenike. For sure. I think when we think about teaching and what is involved with embedding the SDGs, I really liked what Kshamta said about collective action and, moving from a few doing a few things to many. We need everyone everywhere doing everything all at once is the line that I like to use. And so how do we the idea of the SDGs framing those values or giving everyone a sense of priority or an action that they relate to most that they can work towards is where I see great value in how we use the Sustainable Development Goals. I think students are supported through our relationships, and when we build relationships amongst ourselves as faculty and help ourselves see our interdisciplinarity, we help students see the interdisciplinary way that they can help engage with the world.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that, Aditi. And I understand, I really appreciate the collaborative approach among faculty members. And just moving on to you, Caroline, can you share what you think embedding the sustainability means to you?
Well, building on what was just said, that on the one hand, that we've got this notion of collaboration. On the other hand, embedding the SDGs in the curriculum is also an action. It's not about a focus on a disciplinary content, full stop. It's not only what you're doing in the classroom, it's how you're doing it in the classroom.
Yeah.
At York and in my practice, I think about sustainability in the curriculum as an ecosystem. One professor has control of what happens in their classroom, but what's happening in the program, what's happening in the faculty, what's happening at the administrative level, in what ways are colleagues able to connect with each other across the curriculum, across the faculty boundaries, to have these conversations, and what ways are community members brought in. So if we think about the sustainability of anything within the university, we have to think in terms of systems and collaborations and ways of bringing lots of people together, or else what happens in the classroom is dependent and will end as soon as that professor stops teaching. So if what we want to see is something that builds and grows and becomes sustainable, then it has to exist in all the areas of the university. We're faculty, we're staff, we're administrators, we're students, where the community joins together.
Mhm. And I agree that it does take a community to kind of push all of this even for a bit further. Thank you so much for that, Caroline. And Jennifer, any thoughts on this you would like to share with us?
Thank you. Yes. I mean, I think as I listen to my fellow panelists, and what I'm also seeing out in the field is, for me, this idea around identity. I know when I first came in contact with the global goals, for me, I saw myself as an educator, and I was kind of boxed into SDG 4. I was like, I'm in education, so that must mean that quality education is the global goal for me. And so my background as a literacy specialist, and I guess even just as an educator, my identity had been based on credentials or what someone else had told me. You're hired to be an English teacher, therefore you are an English teacher. You have training as a speech pathologist, you are a speech pathologist. So I saw the other goals as almost off limits for me. And then over the years, I started to associate with different SDGs, really interested in SDG 17 with partnerships and inequities. And I never would have thought I would land in a role where I was focused mainly on climate action. You know, that was not something I had been trained in, but all roads as I move forward led to climate change. So I think with so many teachers that I work with, they're finding themselves in a similar situation of identity, and helping our colleagues to understand that all the SDGs are all of us. We can cross over that roadmap, and we can branch out beyond just SDG 4, which I really believe it starts with professional development. And as so many have said today, collaboration, being together as colleagues.
Yeah. Thank you so much for that, Jennifer. And I do understand that just not looking at one SDG in the silos, but looking at all the SDGs will definitely help in embedding sustainability. And just moving on to my next question, and I'm going to start off with you, Caroline. I know you have been involved in developing a good project, a toolkit that has been so useful, the SDGs in the classroom. And one of the components of that project is focused on building faculties' instructors' capacity to teach the SDGs. But do you think that with higher educational courses, that infusing sustainability learning are still largely typical subjects we associate with sustainability? Do you agree with this, or what's your position on this, Caroline?
That is something that actually is my largest struggle, being in humanities and working in a largely liberal arts context, is working with faculty and talking to faculty, my colleagues, about what it is that I'm doing in my classroom through a sustainability lens. And so many faculty equate what is in scope with their discipline and their course content. And the SDG language is simply outside the scope of most of the liberal arts. So they look at that language and they look at the goals, and they see all this natural world related stuff, and they're going, you know, how am I going to fit this in my classroom that doesn't make it feel like I'm creating a Frankenstein's monster? I was really happy then. This is something Sandra Peniston, who is my co-lead, and myself have been working on our SDG in the curriculum project. And that's on being able to create a wider understanding of the SDGs beyond the individual SDGs. And I believe I sent a graphic that shows the SDGs mapped onto key principles. And it's these key principles, the planet, prosperity, peace, partnerships, people. Once you start thinking about the SDGs at these thematic levels, there's not too many programs within the university that fall outside any of these. So if we can focus where the goals themselves are related to the curriculum or the discipline, fantastic. But where there's not a direct connect, this is where these principles can be very, very useful to say, let's take it up a level. Are we in my classroom really addressing those goals as stated in the SDGs? No. What are we doing? We're helping students understand how what I'm teaching them relates thematically to these larger issues. And through that, through the more specific issues as they start conceiving of their own research projects, their own community-based projects, they start thinking about the kinds of placements they want to do, then the SDGs themselves provide a grounding. But to start from the SDGs when your discipline does not align naturally with the SDGs, at least at that surface level, is a hard go. I mentioned the toolkit for the SDGs, and I believe the link is handy if somebody could upload the link. This is an open resource, open education resource, and it's something it's still growing. It's an organic resource. So certainly if there's something that you're using in your institutions that you would like to see included in the toolkit, send it to us and we'll put it up there. This isn't about York owning the toolkit. It's about all of us together creating a set of resources that could be very useful for all of us in terms of what is it people in different disciplines are doing to integrate the SDGs into their curriculum. What are the resources that are available? Seeing videos of people who have done things in different programs. So this is a national resource, an international resource. So if there's something you would like to share to highlight that would be of benefit to the toolkit, there's a link on the toolkit. You could send it to us, let us know, and we would be more than happy to build this even more broadly, because there's, as I said, there's not too many places where you can't have a deep and meaningful conversation about the SDGs if you can get past the 17 and where do I fit, which is where a professor typically goes. What is the content that I belong in? Who, where's my home base? Rather than what Kshamta was saying, it is also a practice. It's it's a pedagogy. It's a way of creating courses. It's a way of creating a culture within a course. So there's lots of possibilities, and the toolkit, as I said, I invite you to participate in making this something we can all use.
Thank you so much for that, Caroline. And just before you go, a question I have is for individuals that might not have access to the toolkit, that want to even just begin the conversations with other faculty members that might not be familiar with the SDGs, what do you think should be their first points to kind of pass across? Just very quickly, I know, before we move on to the other panelists. Yes.
What are you trying to achieve in your classroom? Once your students have learned what it is you think you're teaching them, what do you think they're going to be able to do with that? How can you make your time, your effort, your discipline more relevant, more sustainable, more applied in today's world? So if you can start from what is it you're trying to achieve, full stop, not just for grading purposes, but for the moral purposes of being an educator. What does it mean to educate in a time of polycrisis? Do we really have the luxury of pretending that crises aren't affecting ourselves and our students on a very intimate basis? We cannot teach like we are in petri dishes and isolated from the world.
Thank you so much for that, Caroline. There has to be a shift in the way we're teaching in this current climate. And I'm just going to move on very quickly to you, Jennifer, just to hear your thoughts. How have you been able to navigate this? Do you think they're still largely in such subjects associated with sustainability?
So, and I can tell you what I'm observing currently this year. It does tend to evolve. So if I would have answered it a few years ago, my response may be different. But I have two programs running right now that I can pull from. The first is our goals project. So our 6-week free global collaboration project, where we're bringing educators together from around the world. We have about 5,000 schools joining from age 3 all the way up through university. And so the university professors that we are seeing joining this year are largely outside of sustainability fields. So this makes me feel, I think it's about awareness and looking for opportunities for connection. So I think this idea of virtual exchange, having students working with other students who may live and look differently from them. With that project, we're just getting classrooms in and they're sharing and they're taking on the goals in a very time-bound, it's quite urgent learning experience because they only have a few weeks to do it. So professors are fitting that into their curriculum that they already have set. Another program that we're running right now, which I'm learning so much from, it's through the US Department of State, and we're working with 40 professors in Indonesia across the country, and they're all teaching English as a foreign language. So we're talking about communication and connecting to, in this case, SDG 13 with climate action. So that's a 10-week virtual exchange, professional development experience for professors. And we're looking at how can we talk about climate change through activities related to reading, writing, listening, and speaking as their students then are building language skills. So, and we're doing that, like I met this morning with a university in New York. So their students are recording videos of what does climate look like in New York State and sharing those over with students in Indonesia. So I think it's, for me, what I've observed is just getting those connections started and then moving into discussions around the SDGs. So kind of turning it on its head, instead of starting with the SDGs and then going from there, it's really building on what's already working within your practice.
Thank you for that, Jennifer. And I'd love to hear more about the project in Indonesia. I'm hoping we have a bit of more time to dive deeper into that. And Aditi, do you have any thoughts on this?
Thank you. Yes, it was, that idea of diving deeper into what we already know and valuing and honoring what we already have in our toolkit is, I think, really helpful and supportive of faculty who are going above and beyond, who are trying something new. It's easier to do the same thing over and over again, perhaps. I know I would get frustrated with doing the same thing over. I'll mention a couple of points to that point. When Jennifer, you'd mentioned how you felt like you were SDG 4. When I was a classroom teacher, I rejected SDG 4. I was like, that's the one I don't want to do. Like, I don't like this. Like that's so subjective. What's quality education? Which is hilarious now that I'm in a role that's 4.7. Make sure everyone has the skills and knowledge for sustainability. But I think what that gave me though was the freedom to say, as a math and science teacher, how am I going to get the other SDGs? And I made it very much co-created an initiative with my students, and my students were the ones who went out and found the connections and picked what was valuable and meaningful for them. So I think the role of the educator in that sense was to provide the framework and the sandbox, almost to say, this is the sandbox you can play in. These are the tools that I've offered for you to create with, and what can you come up with? And students have so much creativity and this drive to show us what matters to them that I think we can leverage that both in K-12 and in higher education. So offering opportunities to really honor what students bring to the playing field. And to that end, a word that really guides my practice is nagati tamoin, which is the Cree word. I come from Treaty 6 territory in Canada, which is homeland of the Métis and many other nations. And nagati tamoin is a Cree word for sustainability. And the root of the words are actually honor and protect. And so that idea of what do we want students to honor and protect? How does it feel when we are honored and protected? Is where I base a lot of my work. And so I come back to that idea of how we can help everyone identify what matters to them and how they can nurture and take care of what matters to them in that way, which I'll make that protection element ties in nicely what Carolyn mentioned around the 5 Ps. If all of us have at least one of those Ps that we would want to honor and protect.
Thank you, Aditi. And I think you made a valid point about offering the opportunities for students to kind of explain what matters to them. And I think there's just this relationship that faculty and educators have to have with students to help build this lasting impact for sustainability in our classrooms. And Kshamta, please do share your thoughts about this. on this question, please.
Yeah, I completely agree with my fellow panelists. I think, but coming from a curriculum and pedagogy background, I think there's the curriculum, the content, but then there is the approaches and how you do things in the classroom. And I think it connects to what Carolyn was saying is, I think it's important to bring some of the issues, the current issues that we are facing, and that's the content part, that how it is connect to your own pedagogy, or sorry, curriculum. But then how do we easily bring the pedagogies, the approaches, how you are interacting, how are you bringing those values into your classroom, how are you bringing collaboration, how are you bringing facilitation, how are you bringing teamwork and trauma-informed and justice-informed approaches. That is something that doesn't necessarily need to connect to any particular content, and it's the approach. And I think that's SDGs are sort of asking or sort of demanding in some ways the content, but also the approaches of how we've been relating to each other, and that relationship building is really important. So kind of going to the constructive pedagogies, and I think I would give a big shout out to the toolkit, the SDG toolkit that Carolyn's team has developed at York University. We have been collaborating with them and contributing to the resource as well, in terms of also creating resources, but new sections. And I think that's a great place to go for, to just learn about different approaches and different pedagogies. The toolkit really lays it out really, really well. In terms of if sustainability only belongs to that sustainability sort of courses, I do agree. I think we have a lot of work to be done in terms of moving beyond the forestry and LFS, land and food systems only. But I would say the changes are happening, and individuals and faculty members are really trying to embed SDGs and the global goals into their courses. For example, our business school here at UBC has a new focus on climate literacy, and they're really embedding SDGs from the top down. So trying to embed at the curriculum level and asking every course instructor to embed those in their curriculum. And so I think this notion of like, yes, it's a grassroots movement, but it has to be top down sometimes as well, to make sure that it's we are getting to the goals that we really want. And I would also just one last thing that I mentioned is the role of co-curricular programs at universities and at institutions. And I think they have a big and huge part to play, especially when we are talking about leadership and innovation. And students are looking for those experiential experiences to work with the community, to work on community projects. And I would also add that employers are looking for these skills, and they are looking for these leadership abilities. They're looking for these competencies. So oftentimes, a lot of our students, when they land jobs, they're actually using the experiences that they have gained from co-curricular programs, more so than courses, the traditional courses. So I would say that co-curricular experiential experience is really, really important as well.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much for that, Kshamta. And I would like you to expand a bit more much later about this experiential learning and helping students build those competencies through that approach. So I'll just take a quick pause to remind everyone to please put your questions in the Q&A box as we're going along. So moving on to the next question, and I'll start off with you this time, Aditi. And I know you've put a tremendous amount of work into building University of Saskatchewan's competency framework for sustainability and the UN SDGs. In your opinion, what are the key competencies you see that students must develop, and strategies to help develop these competencies?
Sure, I'll put a link in the chat where you can find a list of our undergraduate competencies. I'll say we actually sought a broader framework. We wanted to align our career readiness skills with our learning charter and our student commitments, as well as bringing in the UNESCO key competencies. So that work resulted in us adopting these 6 competencies that have been adopted by most of our governing boards. And what we're looking for really are ways that we can now use these to help students reflect, share, act on sustainability and reflect on their own growth in their careers or their life overall. And, you know, what Kshamta said about the co-curricular programming, we have found co-curricular programming to be a great testing bed for seeing how the competencies play out through community engaged learning and setting up small projects. We've had a really successful program, and I would like to say that we're serving the whole university campus through this, but the reality is that we can only intake a few hundred students through community engaged learning in a year. If I can get these competencies embedded in the same way in an undergraduate course, I can affect thousands of students. So if I can get these types of competency frameworks and what we call them wraparounds, so kind of a pre, during, and after reflective and feedback process for students. So if I can get these wraparounds embedded in more courses and impact the teaching practices on a faculty, I can have a greater impact and have students across our university becoming what the world needs more effectively. So I really appreciate the co-curricular opportunity. And now I want to say these competencies are effective. We know that students are saying, this is working for me. This is what I'm learning. This is how I know I've learned it. This is the evidence that I have. Now can I put that into teaching practices so even more students benefit from it?
Thank you so much for that, Aditi. And I like the reflective component of that, and getting students to kind of the before, after, that kind of just helps educators in their own teaching practice as well. And I think that's fantastic. Kshamta, do you want to share any approaches you have come across to help develop these competences?
Yeah, just to build on that, I think I think we know that UNESCO had highlighted 8 sustainability competencies in about 2017, I believe. And we have been working quite, I think, again, building on Aditi's comment on co-curricular programming, and I think that's exactly what it is. It's a great testing bed. It's a great way to experiment and really develop those competencies in students, and that's what we've been hearing from our students here at UBC as well. I would share one of the leadership programs that we run here at UBC, and it is based in the competencies as well. I don't know if that will be shared with everybody, but I've put it in there for the host and panelists. But this program is a co-curricular leadership program, and it is based in the sustainability competencies. And it's really, really interesting how students really gravitate towards that in terms of how do we navigate these issues that are actually happening in the communities, working with the community partners, and as well as developing these competencies while you are working on real issues. And I think that's what it's all about in terms of developing those competencies. So this is a great program that I feel it's one examples of embedding those competencies. And I'd be happy to share more information about it if folks are interested.
Thank you so much for that, Kshamta. And I'm just going to quickly move on to you, Jennifer, if you could share your thoughts on that, please.
Yes, thank you. I mean, I think for us in our practice, we're still really focused on building global competencies. We're trying to move people along. Even just awareness that the goals exist is something daily that we're finding. But with the professors, educators we're working with, ideas around investigating the world, sharing perspectives, communicating ideas, taking action really seems to resonate with them. One of my interns in our program, she is finishing up her bachelor's program and moving into a master's level program that she was just sharing with me a few weeks ago. And so it'll be in sustainability. It's an interdisciplinary program, and their approach will be around skill building in terms of coding, video and photography, like all of these different skills to help them as storytellers as they go out. And there's 3 tracks. She picked climate action. So I'm really interested in programs like that, following along with some of these innovative ideas on how we can bring sustainability into our university programs. And I mean, even going back to our earlier points around just building on what's already working, I think another approach that we're really incorporating is around asset-based community development. So working to make sure everyone feels empowered within the work and can build on the skills that they're already working on developing.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I think you mentioned the innovative approach that a lot of educators are taking these days, and that's so incredible to see. And I can attest to, just going back to a bit with Kshamta's ambassadors program, it just shows how innovative we're becoming, and it's so good to see that. And I'm just going to give you the floor, Caroline, to kind of share your thoughts. How can we as educators improve students' competences, accessibility competences, and learning outcomes?
Well, earlier I mentioned the ecosystem and someone else mentioned co-curricular. So what we've been doing at York is creating not a single framework, but an integrated framework. People get very tied to their competencies. And there was a period of time when everybody was creating competencies for their own silo within the university. So we're creating a integrated framework. So the competencies that students learn through the work study program map onto the competencies that staff folk at York can build throughout their employment at York. And we're actually mapping the OODLs, which are the undergraduate degree expectations that are set by the provincial government. We're looking at ways at integrating the OODLs into the competencies that students are using for their work studies, and the competencies that CPM, that our managerial systems folk are beginning to develop too. So students are saying, oh, I'm in this context and here are the competencies here. But when I move to that context, I have to learn all these other competencies. So it's starting to say, you know what, there's a fair amount of overlap, and the UN competencies aren't all that different. How they are used may be different, but what the competencies are completely in alignment with the undergraduate degree expectations, with what we've created as our university student competencies, and with our managerial competencies. So we're looking at ways of building those bridges to have fewer silos and a more integrated approach. So it's easier, if we're all using the same language, it's easier for students to see and make those connections, that what I'm doing in my classroom, how does that relate to what I'm doing in my work study program? If I go to work at York, how does it connect to that? And how does all of this connect to the UN sustainability goals? It's not having to learn something different, it's integrating into what I'm doing, and the integrated competency framework can help with that.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Caroline. And I'm so happy to hear about the inspiring work you're doing at York University to kind of break down these silos and help students kind of understand how to build competencies across all functions. So that's incredible to hear. Just moving on to our last question for today. And I'm going to start off with you, Jennifer. You have been doing good work with the Teach the SDGs and Take Action Global. And I know you touched a bit about the climate education project you're working on in Indonesia. Can you tell us what your practical tips are or advice for anyone that is pretty much just starting off in embedding the SDGs into their teaching and learning? What do you think are the first steps they can kind of take on?
I mean, there's so many different ways to approach it. I would say for us, our approach is always going to be around connecting with people first. So that would be my recommendation to someone. If you're either new to the SDGs, or if you've known about the SDGs but are looking for ways to start incorporating them into practice, start with a virtual exchange. So find another classroom. It can be a classroom next to yours. It might be a different section you're teaching, but ideally it would be great to connect with a classroom in a different part of the world and just begin a conversation. I think turning it over to your students, someone here also mentioned just a sandbox, being a help desk to students, a facilitator of that learning, co-construct the experience instead of building it all out, having your checkboxes ready. But that's for us what we've seen really work with people who are new to bringing the SDGs into their classrooms.
Thank you, Jennifer. And I like the point about building the sandboxes and all that cool stuff. So I think I'll give you a bit of time to kind of dive a bit more into that project at the tail end. But thank you so much, Jennifer. And just moving on to Kshamta. Are there any tips or steps you would like us as educators that we can take towards embedding the sustainability into our teaching practice?
Yes, thank you, Morenike. I would just, before I go to that, I would just wanted to respond to Carolyn's kind of competencies approach. And I absolutely agree that there's so much alignment between all these different sets of competencies that we see. Part of my PhD research was actually mapping different competencies. So if you're interested in that work, I'm happy to share that. It's part of my thesis publication as well. So mapping out the innovation competencies, the sustainability competencies, the 21st century competencies. So there are a lot out there, but I would agree 99% of the time they're very much aligned. They're very similar. So I think our approaches could be very similar as well. I would also say, just wanted to mention that in my work, I find starting with self-awareness is really the key. So kind of building that fundamental idea of how do we start from the self, from the individual, and then connecting that to the other aspects of the competencies, but also the other challenges and issues that we are facing. In terms of starting, I think starting small is great if you're just like new to this, picking one SDG, but even kind of going beyond that, picking an issue of interest to you or something of passion to you. It's always good. But also maybe bringing students as partners into this and giving them the ability to choose their own topics that they want to engage in, and building assignments that are open in that regard. And I think that is kind of the easiest and the much more rich experience for the classroom and for the students.
Mm-hmm. And just following up with you, Kshamta, have you faced any challenges so far in kind of bringing students and partnering with them on this front? Do you think, and in terms of starting small as well, are there any challenges you have faced that people can kind of learn from as well?
At the start, they do feel a little bit lost. If you, sometimes students just don't know where to. I wouldn't say that's true for all students. I think some students may require a little bit more support and guidance. But once they are there, I think it's actually, they really prefer this approach of open-endedness and kind of going. I think the tough part is to start thinking beyond the grades and what the instructor wants. And I think for a lot of students, it's really hard because they're so classically conditioned from K to 12 and in university to be able to work for the grades and kind of jump those hoops. So I think it's kind of the mindset shift a little bit that I think for me, understanding that it's a bit of a challenge. And I think that's what I'm trying to support and change. And that's what I mean by kind of going beyond the traditional ways of educating and bringing students as partners and bringing them in the partners to change the curriculum that you have. And one of the things I do is open up my curriculum in the first week and say, on the first day, I share my curriculum 2 weeks in advance. And then on the first day, I'm like, is there any changes? Would you like to see something that's not there? Or would you like to not see something that's there? I mean, usually there isn't a whole lot of kind of input on the first day because students are new, but as you get to know them and build those relationships, those perspectives do come through.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kshamta. And I like the idea of partnering with students and going beyond the traditional way of educating to kind of looking for more innovative approaches to this. And I would like to hear your thoughts, Caroline, on this. Are there any practical tips you would like to share?
I'm cheering for Kshamta. That's kind of what I do too, trying to train students. It's sort of like unplugging them from the Borg. We get them in isolated learning environments that's safe, that's measurable, that's predictable. Every student knows exactly what's going to happen if they do something in a certain way. You know, if they do it that way, then the next thing comes and the next thing comes. They don't have to ask for it. It's all there. And of course, life doesn't have a syllabus, and you know, the things that you do don't come with rubrics. A lot of times you simply do not know. And this is where the inequity issue comes in. So if you have students that are from professional families or from families that are activists or that kind of thing, they've already got that ecosystem of people around them. But if a lot of our students aren't like that. So for more concrete example, one of my courses, it's the capstone course in humanities called Doing Culture. And it gives students an opportunity to engage in placements, projects, or research in the cultural sector in the GTA. And after doing some of the work with the SDGs that I've been doing in the fall term, I've posed 4 questions. What does it mean to do culture? Why is it easier for some people to do culture than others? How can we do culture without doing harm? And then the actual time when they're out in the community is, how do we do culture in a good way? And it's integrating Indigenous ways of knowing, it's integrating other cultural ways of knowing, it's going through that process of understanding and recognizing bias and helping students work on it. But then the students themselves, they make the connections with the organizations that they're going to work with. They conceive of what those projects are going to be. They create the project plan and the team charters, and they work through how they're going to make this happen. I'm there as a safety net, so it's the first time most of these students have ever done this, but they are the ones that are doing it. And for most of those students, since they were 4 years old starting JK, it's the first time they're in a no guaranteed outcome scenario when they are figuring out what they can do. And for many students, that's that realization, oh my goodness, I can make things happen. I can create something where there was nothing before. I can create organizations and pitch an idea. And that's sort of like advocacy 101 for people who aren't already signing up for programs that actually have advocacy as part of the program. But if we're not teaching our students to be active, engaged, confident citizens, they don't pick up the mantle. They see that as someone else's job. They're waiting for the expert to come in and take the lead, but they don't see their own role in making any of that happen. So that's where I think we can really focus in and make a difference through education in terms of what's going on in the world.
Thank you, Caroline. And I think I like the idea of you acting like a safety net for students and just kind of leading them to make those kind of decisions. And I think that's how they learn much better. Just moving on to Aditi, any thoughts on the advice? Any first steps you give anyone in embedding sustainability?
Yeah, well, there's been so much discussed already. I'll put a link in the chat for a new guidebook that we've come out with. We had a faculty fellows program for the past 2 years where we had folks who felt like they were novices and not experienced with sustainability take on that mantle and that role of becoming, we put together about 30 hours of professional development for them, including visiting community partners, including how to provide choice and voice, how some active learning strategies. And then they took that and adopted it in their own courses. And I've written this guidebook, Cultivating Change, to describe their experiences and what they found to be effective in embedding the Sustainable Development Goals and teaching practices for sustainability, which are on the website that I posted earlier. So, there's a question in the Q&A about how do you shift that mindset? And I think a lot of times people need to see this as achievable, and it has to build on what they know, as Jennifer mentioned. So how do you do that? We thought the fellows were a way to do that, so that, a fellow could show their colleagues that they can do this in the College of Kinesiology. So, if you're more into physical movement and you're thinking, well, how do I relate to sustainability? Opening it up and saying, well, look at these SDGs. Do any of these connect to what you're trying to do? And then seeing the connections to active transportation and sustainable cities, to good health and well-being, social determinants of health, with zero hunger. So there, we opened it up through a fellow who at first, when I asked her to apply for the fellowship, because I knew she'd come to a few of my workshops, she was like, me, really? You want me to be a sustainability fellow? How do I connect in with this? And then she thought about it overnight, and then she came back, she's like, yeah, actually I can see this. And now we've got like 8 courses in the College of Kinesiology where I never thought we would have sustainability embedded across the curriculum, from first year through graduate courses that have embedded the Sustainable Development Goals, because they were willing to be flexible, and she was able to show her colleagues what she could do from nothing. So, well, not nothing, she had lots of skills and tools already, but that was a real success.
Thank you, Aditi. And I think I like the example you shared about your fellows, and just takes me back to what Kshamta mentioned in starting from what you're interested in and just start taking it up from there. And I think all of this have been great so far. Thank you so much, Aditi. We now have some time for a brief Q&A. I know we're going close to the hour now. And I can just see one question in the chat box and another one in the Q&A. And Nadia is asking, are there any guidance on how to shift the mindset of faculty members, as they always ask, what should they include in their courses and how to embed sustainability? Any of you can take that on. Go ahead, Caroline.
I just put a link to a project, another eCampus book called Envision YU. And this was designed, it's completely customizable. You can download any of the exercises in Envision YU down into any course management system and customize the language to your course, to the activity you're trying to achieve in your course. And it focuses on transition skills, but within the focus of those transition skills, there's clusters of how do you connect with communities? How do you work effectively with communities and identify what are the issues and how you can lift up those communities? How do you do project plans and collaboration? So for faculty have a tendency, I know my discipline, that's what I know. I'm not teaching anything that I haven't got a PhD and peer-reviewed feedback on. Where none of us, very few of us, have that when it comes to the SDGs. So having something that's sort of beginning to be created that they can still have control over. I'm not saying, here, take this thing, somebody who doesn't know you or your course was created, and do something with it. But it's a starting point for them to start. Here, I'll give, to help them with that, we created a, just getting my poor little computer started. We created a website for faculty on how to use this that'll help them get through it all. So I will post that link very shortly, and it's a way of saying, okay, quasi-developing things so you don't have to start from scratch, but here's a way to get started. Give it a go, plan it around. I put these in my class and I change them a lot. The language I use isn't that language, but a lot of the language, especially the scenarios, are SDG related scenarios. And you could shift it up and change it any way you wanted without having to do all the grunt work.
Thank you, Caroline. Does anyone else have any thoughts they'd like to share on that question? Aditi, Kshamta, Jennifer, please go ahead.
I can share just an example that I had used in my university classes early on with the SDGs. So a lot of the educators we work with, it's kind of a bottom-up approach. They're not mandated to bring the SDGs into their curricula. So what I've done is introduce the SDGs to my students and say, and that was a moment where I could be really vulnerable with them. I mean, we talk about this idea of feeling expertise with the SDGs. I've been working with them for a long time, and I still feel very unqualified with a lot of the work. But talking to my students, these are new for me. Just hanging the poster in the room or in your LMS and saying, I'm learning about these. Do you want to learn with me? I'm going to be mapping our course over the next few months in our semester. Will you help me identify places where the SDGs pop up? So, I think the people I know that are teaching, we're already doing the work of the SDGs, and we just can be more explicit in identifying those areas. So make it a challenge with your students and that spirit of co-creation. And then by the end saying, look at all of these ways that we're incorporating the global goals and what we're already doing. So I think that's a very foundational way of starting if people are just getting going.
I'm curious. Thank you. Thanks for that, Jennifer. Kshamta, Aditi, do you want to respond to the question?
I would just say quickly, I would agree with Jennifer that I think the chances are that you're already doing this work in your courses. And I think it's the matter of saying, okay, this connects. So you can do it two ways. One is that look at your current curriculum and see how it connects to the existing SDGs, or go the other way, starting from the SDGs and try and make those connections to their learning objectives. So I think it could be done both ways, but I would just go back to starting small, and I really, again, I agree with Jennifer, kind of doing that overview of SDGs sometimes really helps. And I do that with my class as well, kind of going together and learning about the SDGs, what they are. And a lot of the time students don't know about the SDGs. So it's kind of an awareness thing. And then also once they do know, they are like, oh, I didn't even know that they existed. This is great. We are working towards this as a global community. This is the first time ever that the global community, 193 nations, have agreed on something. You know, and I think that kind of really lifts them up in some ways. I mean, I teach in the teacher education program, and for teachers to take this in their classroom and say, hey, this could be a great motivator for my students if I take this in the classroom. So I think even doing that, that very intro exercise is really key.
Useful. And I agree with you, Kshamta. And I think one thing we have seen at SDSN is, and on the flip side, faculty members too don't know about the SDGs as well. So that awareness raising piece is very important across students, across faculty, across educators, to kind of help them gain more awareness and perspective about the SDGs. So I think that's key. I think we just have one more question, and then we're coming close to the hour. And this just kind of open. Someone had asked, has any of you engaged with the inner development goals in your teaching? Have you adopted that? Have you heard about that? And do you have anything to share on it?
I can take that. Yes, absolutely. Have heard of them, have looked through their website and looked through the collection. I haven't used them to facilitate any workshops. I highly recommend folks go check out their website. They've got, what I do find interesting is some of the critiques around the SDGs, not including elements of culture and you know, living in the Canadian context. There's no mention of the needs of Indigenous people or advocating for inclusion of the needs of Indigenous people. So Canada has taken on some of that role through the Canadian ambitions to articulate what this looks like in our own context. So I think moving forward, whatever comes next after 2030, and I think we need to start having that conversation, whatever comes after the SDGs needs to include those voices, and I think will include culture and those inner goals. I've heard from faculty who were working with students on the SDGs this last term that, you know, students were really feeling like, oh, but like I can't control what's going on out there, but maybe I can control what's going on within me. And how that conversation did turn into, what can I do myself to be more mindful and to be in the right headspace, kind of that poly crisis that someone mentioned. That's affecting our students. Like, they're experiencing this from all different mediums, and if we can equip them with some tools, or at least like hold the space to say we acknowledge that you're experiencing this, can have a huge impact.
Thank you, Aditi. And I think in my head, one of the values of education or learning in general is more equipping students and kind of helping them go through these tough questions and seeing how to solve them on their own. It does make learning so vital and critical. So thank you, Aditi. Does anyone want to share any last thoughts? I'm just going to give everyone a few seconds, more like it, to share your closing remarks with us. And I can start off with you, Caroline.
It's been brought up by a few of the speakers, but if this is a conversation that if it is not your area of study, including your students in the process, and as Aditi was saying, having them do, bridge some of the gaps with you, learning how to learn together is very, very empowering. And being in a classroom where your professor is helping to guide you through the learning process, but the students themselves are through their own activities, their own concerns about the world, the things that they want to do in their lives. If they have some control over the curriculum, and you work in a more collaborative way to sort of create this rich learning environment, you don't have to wait till you have all the answers to integrate the SDGs. It can be an exploration that you take with your students.
Thank you for that. Just start where you are, Caroline, and I totally agree. Kshamta, any last words?
Now, I would just say, just to build a little bit on that inner development goals, and I think it's really important to, that's why I said the self-awareness is really key. And I think a lot of the inner development goals are really getting to that point of how do we fundamentally start as individuals. So I would say that I haven't been integrating them as the framework, but some of the learnings definitely included in my, and I would agree with Carolyn, that's starting somewhere. You don't have to be an expert in
Yeah.
anything. And I think we are all facing and experiencing the challenges of the crisis wherever we live. So that's experience enough to bring
Yeah.
these into conversation.
Yes, I agree. Thank you, Kshamta. Jennifer, please go ahead.
Thank you. I mean, I think for me, it's just a message of gratitude for everyone who's joined for this hour and prioritizing the SDGs and giving us a moment to share our perspectives and experiences. I'd love to connect further, and thank you all for the work that you're doing. I'm incredibly inspired.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jennifer. And you're inspiring as well with your work with the Teach for SDGs and Take Global Action. And I'm hoping you can share more with that with us, maybe in the follow-up email as well. But all the links will be shared with everyone. So thank you. Aditi, last word?
I always leave these with like 10 open tabs and so many rabbit holes to go down. So thank you to all the panelists and to the participants who put links in the chat for us. It gives me hope and it revitalizes me for the future. So thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you everyone for joining us today. We have come to the end of the session, and thank you to all our amazing panelists. It was so inspiring hearing everyone speak. I know that we should kind of look into extending the hour a bit in the future, but thank you so much for joining us today. As a follow-up, all the links, all the chats will be sent alongside the recording in a follow-up email to everyone who registered for the session today. We also like to leave you with this session was part of the SDG Week Canada, and please do check out the link in the chat box on other activities that are going on other campuses in Canada. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today, and enjoy the rest of your day. Bye everyone.